Divorce didn't just end my marriage, it emptied my life. Calvin Pierce walked away with the house, the car, the accounts, and the friends who knew how to hug you without wrinkling their suits. I walked into the Langston Hotel in Midtown Atlanta, asking for a job, and left with a black uniform. Sore feet and a promise to myself, if dignity had a floor, I'd keep standing on it. The Langston didn't hire women in their 50s to serve in its signature restaurant. They preferred 22-year-old smiles and unblemished histories. But exceptions appear when your references include old money socialites who remember the dinners you used to host and the piano you used to play. 5 years after Calvin stripped me in court, I had become an elegant fixture balancing crystal and silver with the quiet grace of a woman who learned how to swallow humiliation with her espresso. Patrice. VIP section tonight, said Diana, our floor manager, as I clocked in. Penthouse guest is dining downstairs. He expects flawless service and absolute discretion. I nodded like it was nothing. Inside, something tightened. Micah Mercer, tech billionaire, energy innovator, notoriously private, was the guest every luxury hotel whispered about and almost never saw. You knew of him, but you didn't know him. I'd carried champagne to actors who practiced gratitude for the camera and moguls who practiced cruelty for sport. But his name landed differently, as if pressed against a bruise I couldn't see. The dining room glowed in warm brass and candlelight, the band at the back coaxing jazz into a hush that felt like expensive perfume. When he arrived, the room adjusted itself without meaning to. Voices softened, posture straightened, the air focused. He was tall, shoulders set with the kind of calm that made a security detail look unnecessary. Close-cropped waves, a strong forehead, eyes like he'd measured the room in one glance and forgiven it for being predictable. I moved with the choreography that lives in a seasoned server's bones. Water first, then wine list, then the kind of suggestions that sound like permission rather than pressure. He thanked me without looking up, the low tenor of his voice grazing my skin like a familiar song. When he finally reached for the menu, his cuff shifted back, and I saw it. A crescent moon birthmark curved just beneath the watchband of his left wrist. Small, particular, the exact echo of the mark on my own skin. The tray pitched a fraction. Crystal chimed. My grip corrected itself before the room noticed, but in that half-second I was 22 again on a hospital bed, half sedated, reaching toward a bassinet that receded like a tide going out too fast. A nurse's voice. A doctor's finality. A word that had rebuilt my life into a mausoleum. Stillborn. Are you all right? He asked, and the question was almost private, as if he'd laid a hand on the air between us. Yes, I said, and my voice obeyed even while my heart did not. I set his water gently, named the special, advised medium rare without sounding like a command. He chose quickly. Easy guest, elegant appetite. The kind of man who made power look like quiet and quiet look like power. I would have walked away and breathed in the hallway like a woman who knew better, but his wrist moved again. Casual, inevitable. And the moon flashed, undeniable. Forgive me, I said before the sense could stop me. Could you repeat the reservation name for the check? He glanced up fully for the first time. The gaze was direct without being invasive, and something about it made me recognize what people meant when they said some men carried whole rooms without lifting a finger. Mercer, he said. Micah Mercer. The room did a small, private tilt. Micah. The syllables pressed against memory with the weight of a head once small enough to rest in my palm. 30 years collapsed into a pulse climbing my throat. I smiled in a way that looked like hospitality instead of grief. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. My name tag caught the light as I stepped back. Patrice. Not Pierce. That name I had returned like a stolen dress. Holt, the name I kept. The one my mother carried. I pivoted toward service, each step too carefully measured. My hands knew what to do, fire an order, negotiate a wine, float past an argument that wanted attention and deny it kindly. A woman of my age is a rumor to the young and an answer to the old. I did both, and no one could see the tempest disturbed under my ribs. At the pass, Carmen tilted her head. You good, Miss Patrice? Perfect, I lied. I lifted the entrees, steady as scripture. Back at his table, he thanked me again, and I filed away the way his mouth softened at the edges when he did. He ate without pretense. No fuss, no theatrics. When I offered dessert, he considered and declined with the kind of smile that said discipline wasn't punishment, but habit. Coffee? I asked. Please, I poured, the steam rising. The crescent slept against his pulse. I had told myself 1,000 times over the years that the moon on my wrist meant nothing beyond me. That marks repeat themselves on strangers every day. That Atlanta, with its millions, could hum with 1,000 crescent moons, and none of them would need me. But memory is a liar that tells the truth. It brings back what it wants, dressed in logic or madness depending on the light. He signed the check swiftly when I brought it, his handwriting neat, efficient. As he handed the folio back, his fingers brushed the edge of mine. Not flirtation, contact. The way a branch touches the water and doesn't know it's made a circle. Thank you for the service. Ms. Holt? He said, glancing at my tag again as if to be sure he hadn't misread it. You're welcome. Mr. Mercer, my voice behaved. If you need anything sent up to your suite, I'll call down, he said, and with a small courteous nod, he stood and left as if the night had opened a door just for him. Only when the elevator swallowed him did I let my shoulders drop the centimeter I'd been holding. Diana's eyes cut to me from across the room. I offered the smallest tilt of my chin that said, handled. She moved on. The rest of the shift unspooled in its usual ballet of requests and small interventions, guiding a drunk laugh away from a waitress's hips, steering a plate away from a nut allergy, making a child believe that a tiny spoon was a treasure. I smiled without breaking. I said, of course, and it's my pleasure and right away, with the inflection of someone who had trained her mouth to wear silk over a storm. By the time I hung my jacket on its hook in the staff locker room, the band had packed up and the smell of lemons had replaced the perfume of truffle oil. I pressed my thumb to the inside of my wrist, feeling for the raised crescent I knew by heart. The same, exactly the same. The words clanged in my head like crystal against crystal. Everything okay? Carmen asked again, softer now. Long night, I said. Good tips? She kissed her fingers and touched the air toward me, a blessing. See you tomorrow, Miss Patrice. I nodded, gathered my bag, and walked into the Atlanta night. Peachtree Street glittered like it was trying to seduce the moon. I drove my little car, the one the dealership called pre-loved like affection could be painted on, back to the apartment that had learned every version of my silence. Inside, I turned on one lamp and nothing else. I didn't even take off my shoes. I went straight to the bedroom closet, moved 2 suitcases aside, and reached for the small cedar box I had not opened in 3 years. My mother's handwriting still marked the lid. For when your heart is ready. My heart had been ready and unready 1,000 times. I lifted the latch. Inside lay a hospital ID bracelet yellowed by time, a lock of hair tied with ribbon the color of a night sky, and a photograph whose edges had gone soft from being touched. The picture was grainy, printed on cheap paper not meant to last decades. A newborn swaddled tight, face scrunched, a smudge at his wrist that I used to trace with my thumb, until I imagined I could feel its shape through the gloss. The crescent moon. I pressed the bracelet's stamped letters with my forefinger. One by one, like a rosary I'd make up as I went. Baby boy, Morgan Hospital, November 12th. The year was a door I never opened in daylight. I had been told he was gone before I could hold him. I had been told the nurse would bring me keepsakes to honor a life that had ended before it had properly begun. I had been told a lot of things. By a doctor whose eyes could freeze water, by a nurse who pitied women like me, by a husband who had decided what grief would look like in our house. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth to quiet the sound that wanted out. 30 years and the body still remembers the shape of a newborn's weight, even if your arms were empty. On the dresser, my phone buzzed. A hotel text reminding me of my early shift. I swallowed. Practical things return you to gravity. My eyes drifted back to the photograph. Even washed in age, the mark was clear. The same curve, the same place, Mercer, Micah Mercer. Adopted? Born under another name? My breath snagged. I could pretend this was coincidence. I could pretend I hadn't spent the entire ride home replaying the flick of his cuff and the way my chest had flooded with heat and cold at once. I could pretend I wasn't already choosing between caution and the truth. I went to the bathroom and washed my face like I could wash the thought away. In the mirror, the silver threaded through my coils flashed like honesty. 52 and the kind of beautiful that no longer apologizes for leaving the party early. Back in the bedroom, I set the box on the quilt and sat beside it. My fingers found the habit they'd learned years ago. Press the crescent on my own wrist as if two halves might line up and become whole. Don't be reckless, Patrice. Don't be foolish. But the moon is a liar to caution. It pulls. By morning, I'd perfected a plan that could pass for sensible. Go to work, do the job, and if fate sent him down to the dining room again, ask the kind of question a server could ask without violating any boundary. Not, "Are you my son?" God, no. Something shapeless but specific. A detail turned just enough to catch the light. Sleep found me merciful and thin. It held me until my alarm broke the dark. Atlanta woke with its chorus of buses sighing and morning anchors smiling too wide. I pinned my hair, buttoned my uniform, slipped the crescent-scarred wrist under my cuff. At the staff entrance, the kitchen exhaled garlic and ambition. "Morning, Miss Patrice," the dish team sang, and I answered like I always did. "Let's make it beautiful." Diana's heels clicked toward me. "He called down," she said quietly, her eyes made of news. "Penthouse A requested you for in-suite breakfast." My heart climbed into my throat and sat there, regal and unbothered. "Of course," I said, careful as crystal. "What time?" "Half hour. He wants coffee, fruit, egg whites, wheat toast. Simple. Simple." I smiled like a professional and walked to the service station on legs that remembered dance class. I assembled a tray that could have fed a small prayer. Perfect slices, cups warmed, silver aligned like a promise. When the elevator opened to the penthouse corridor, the carpet swallowed sound the way the ocean swallows confession. I knocked. The door opened almost instantly, as if he'd been standing on the other side waiting for the exact second that would make a memory out of it. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," I replied, the words steady as a heartbeat you pretend is calm. I crossed the threshold with the tray and the poise of a woman who had stepped into rooms like this as a hostess once, and as a server now, and as herself always. The city spilled its gold across the floor. He gestured to a small table by the window. As I set the tray down, the cuff of his robe shifted again. The moon rose, patient, unchanged. My hand hovered in the air for a breath I didn't take. "I hope I'm not too early," I said. Voice silked with courtesy I could put on even in a storm. "Not at all," he answered, pulling out the chair for me the way a man does when his mother raised him right. "Please, have a seat." And just like that, the past took the chair across from me and waited for me to speak. Micah Mercer's penthouse smelled faintly of cedar and something darker. Maybe coffee beans roasted in money. The suite wasn't ostentatious. It was deliberate. Everything here seemed chosen to imply a man who didn't need to prove what he owned. Books on the table, open laptop humming, a record player resting by the window as if silence were just a pause between songs. Patrice steadied the tray on the table. "Your breakfast, sir." "Thank you," Micah said, pulling the chair opposite hers, polite as ever. "You've been with the hotel long?" "5 years," she replied. "Feels longer some nights." He smiled, not as a guest, but as someone who understood endurance. "I imagine this place runs because of people like you." She busied herself arranging the silverware. "People like me," she echoed. "We keep the lights steady." Her hand brushed a napkin. It slipped. When she bent to retrieve it, his wrist turned again, the same moon, the same curve. She felt the air change, heavy with memory. "Mr. Mercer," she said carefully, before she could lose her nerve. "That mark on your wrist, it's quite unique." He looked down at it as if he'd never noticed. "This!" He raised his arm, tilting it toward the light. "I've had it since birth. My adoptive mother used to say I came with my own moon." Her breath stalled. "Adoptive. She forced composure into her tone. It's rare. I've seen one just like it before. Micah's gaze lingered on her, sharp but not unkind. Really, where? She swallowed. On someone I knew. A long time ago. The clock on the mantel ticked, small and accusing. The world waited for her to break open. He leaned back, studying her. You remind me of someone too, he said finally. A face from a photograph my mother kept. An old fundraiser in Savannah before I was born. You were there, I think. He frowned, reaching for the memory. A man named Calvin Pierce? Her pulse stumbled. You knew him? My mother did. She was a physician. They worked together briefly, I think. He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. I remember the name because she once said he had a wife who played the piano beautifully. Patrice's throat tightened. She forced a smile that trembled only at the edges. That was me. Silence expanded, intimate and impossible. The hum of the city below faded until only the faint hiss of coffee filled the air. Micah straightened slowly, the truth orbiting him like gravity. You're Patrice Holt, he said, voice low. My mother mentioned that name too. Said it belonged to a patient who... He stopped. Who lost her child. She could no longer breathe around the word. Lost. Her eyes flicked to the window, where Atlanta glowed like 1,000 lanterns hung for ghosts. Yes, she whispered. That was me. Micah's expression softened, confusion shading into something like awe. That's strange, he murmured. My adoption records are sealed. Even the original hospital file was redacted. But I was born in that same month. That same hospital. Patrice's hands trembled. Morgan Hospital? Yes, it was no longer possible to pretend. The photograph, the bracelet, the mark. Fate had laid its breadcrumbs with surgical precision. She nodded slowly. I have something you should see. From her bag, she drew the small envelope she'd carried since dawn. Inside lay a single photo, worn and creased. A newborn wrapped in gauze, a crescent faint on his wrist. Micah stared, the mask of logic faltering. That's... His voice broke on disbelief. That's impossible. Maybe not, she said softly. You said you were adopted. Did they ever tell you your birth name? He hesitated. No. My mother always said it wasn't important. Patrice's lips trembled into a bitter half-smile. Men wrote those rules. What we forget, they keep for themselves. For a long moment they sat in the golden hush of the penthouse, two strangers staring at a memory neither could unsee. Micah exhaled first. If this is what it looks like, we'll need proof. Real proof, I know, she whispered, and I think I know where to find it. The world had just cracked open, but for the first time in 3 decades, the truth was finally within reach. For a long moment, the only sound in the penthouse was the city breathing through glass. Morning sunlight had begun to slide across the marble, catching the silver coffee pot and the faint steam rising between them. Patrice sat perfectly still, her palms pressed flat against her thighs to hide their tremor. Micah's eyes were fixed on the faded photograph she'd placed before him, the same one she had guarded for 32 years. The man across from her wasn't just powerful. He was composed in a way that made composure look like a weapon. But now, that veneer cracked. His fingers hovered above the photo without touching it, as if contact might rewrite his life. This is you? He finally asked, his voice quiet but not fragile. Yes, Patrice said. The picture was taken the day I gave birth. I was sedated. I remember flashes, machines, a nurse crying, and then the doctor saying... She drew a breath that sounded like it scraped against years. That my baby didn't make it. Micah's throat moved once, swallowing a silence that felt heavy enough to bend light. My mother, Yvette, she always said I was adopted from a private facility. She never said why. Just that it was arranged. He gave a sharp, humorless laugh. Arranged, like it was a dinner seating. Patrice studied him carefully. You said your mother was a physician. What kind? Obstetrics, he replied, the irony bitter on his tongue. She specialized in high-risk births. The room stilled. Patrice pressed her hands together in her lap. The puzzle pieces had stopped scattering. They were aligning themselves. She spoke carefully, each word measured. "You said she worked with Calvin Pierce. Did you ever hear her mention me again?" "Only once," he admitted. "It was years ago. I overheard her on the phone. She said your name, Patrice Holt, like it was something she was afraid to remember. When she saw me listening, she hung up." Patrice's heart clenched. "You were a child?" 13, Micah said. "And curious." He gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I searched for the name for weeks. Nothing came up, until now." He looked at her again, searching for something in her face. Proof, perhaps, or permission. "What are you hoping to find, Ms. Holt?" She inhaled deeply. "Not money. Not attention. Just truth. Because if what I think happened really did, someone stole my son." The words struck like thunder softened by grief. Micah didn't flinch. His gaze lowered to his wrist, the crescent moon gleaming faintly against his skin. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "I want to tell you it's impossible, but—" He looked back at her. "It doesn't feel impossible." "Because it isn't," she said softly. "It feels like coming home." He stood abruptly, pacing toward the window where the skyline stretched across the horizon. "If this is real, then my entire life?" He stopped, the word mother catching somewhere behind his teeth. "Then everything I know was built on a lie." Patrice rose slowly, setting her cup aside. "Sometimes lies wear the face of love," she said. "That doesn't make them right." When he turned back, there was a tremor in his composure. "I need to verify this," he said almost to himself. "Adoption records, hospital files, DNA if we have to." Patrice nodded. "We will. But before that, there's someone else we need to speak to." "Who?" "The attending nurse that night, Dr. Teresa Green." Her voice cracked slightly on the name. "She was there when I delivered. I found out she retired years ago, but she's still alive." Micah exhaled. "Then we start there." Patrice hesitated, emotion thickening her voice. "Micah," he looked at her. "Yes? If you are who I think you are, I don't want to scare you off before we even prove it. I've lived with this emptiness for so long that part of me is afraid to breathe too hard and lose it again." He stepped closer, the distance between them dissolving into something charged and unspoken. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. "Not until we know the truth." For the first time that morning, Patrice smiled, not out of politeness, but out of something deeper. "Then we begin." The morning light poured through the window, touching them both, the mother who had never stopped searching, and the son who had just started to understand what had been taken from him. That afternoon, Patrice could barely remember the hours that followed. The restaurant's noise seemed distant, the clinking of glasses far away, the customers' laughter dulled behind a pane of fog. Every movement felt rehearsed, mechanical, the way a body moves when the mind is somewhere else entirely. Micah Mercer might be her son. Her hands shook every time she thought the words. Her son, the child she had been told was gone, buried in silence and hospital paperwork. The son she had mourned without a grave. By the time her shift ended, the Georgia sun was melting over the skyline, painting everything in that hot orange that makes the city look like it's holding its breath. She gathered her things and stepped out the service door, needing air that didn't smell like money or memory. Her phone buzzed. A message from the front desk. "Ms. Holt, your presence is requested in the lobby. Guest awaiting you." She frowned. Guests didn't request servers after checkout hours, unless it was trouble. She straightened her posture, walked toward the lobby, and froze halfway there. Standing near the fountain, briefcase in hand, was Calvin Pierce, the man she'd once called husband. The man who had stood at her hospital bedside 30 years ago and told her not to ask questions. The man who'd filed for divorce the moment her grief stopped being useful to him. His suit was immaculate, his smile practiced. "Patrice," he said smoothly, as if her name were a favor. "You look well." "Calvin." Her tone was neutral, clipped. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same. But since you're clearly working, I'll keep this short." His gaze swept the room, sharp as ever. I saw you serving him earlier. The young man from the penthouse, Micah Mercer. That's quite an assignment. Her stomach twisted. How do you know his name? Calvin chuckled softly, a sound that had once sounded like charm. Please, Mercer Technologies is a client of Pearson Harrington. I met him this morning. Sharp kid. Private. He paused, studying her face. You looked startled when you saw him. I serve a lot of startled, she said evenly. Part of the job. He tilted his head. You always were a bad liar. Something inside her snapped taut. And you always were a good manipulator. He smiled faintly, but his eyes hardened. Careful, Patrice. You still owe me civility. She stepped closer. And you owe me the truth. For a moment, the facade faltered. His jaw clenched, just barely. About what? You know what? She said quietly. The night our child was born. You said he didn't make it. You said the hospital confirmed it. But you were the one who brought the paperwork. You were the one who spoke to the doctor. Tell me, Calvin, did you ever see his body? Calvin's pupils narrowed. His silence was louder than denial. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Some things are better left buried. Patrice's breath hitched. Then you've already buried your soul. Before he could answer, the penthouse elevator chimed softly behind them. Micah stepped out, immaculate in a dark suit, the image of control. His eyes flicked between them, first polite curiosity, then recognition. Mr. Pierce, Micah said, extending a hand. We meet again. I was just on my way out. I didn't realize you and Ms. Holt were acquainted. Calvin smiled, composure reassembled in an instant. Atlanta's a small town, Mr. Mercer. Everyone knows everyone. Micah nodded slowly. So it seems. His eyes lingered briefly on Patrice, reading her tension. Ms. Holt, I was hoping to continue our conversation from this morning, if you're free this evening. She hesitated only a moment. Yes, of course. Piedmont Park, 8 o'clock, he asked. The cafe by the lake. I'll be there. Micah gave a brief, courteous nod and left through the revolving doors. Calvin turned back to her, his expression unreadable. Careful, Patrice, he murmured. The past isn't as harmless as you remember it. Neither am I, she replied. That evening, the park glowed beneath the dusk, lanterns flickering along the water, cicadas humming in the trees. Patrice arrived early, the box from her mother's closet clutched tight in her bag. She found Micah seated at an outdoor table, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. For the first time, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man waiting for answers. I spoke to my assistant, he said as she sat down. There's something strange about my adoption paperwork. The hospital listed was Morgan Medical Center, but it closed down the year after I was born. All patient records were transferred to a private storage company. Most of them redacted, destroyed, Patrice said. Calvin handled that transfer. He was a legal liaison for the hospital. Micah looked up sharply. Your ex-husband? She nodded. And the man who signed my discharge papers. Micah exhaled slowly. That explains why your name was sealed from mine. She reached into her bag, pulling out a folded page, old, brittle, the ink faded but legible. I found this among my mother's things. It's a letter, written by Dr. Yvette Morgan. Micah froze. My adoptive mother? Yes, Patrice whispered, handing it to him. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was delicate, clinical, and achingly familiar. Patrice Holt was a strong mother. She fought the anesthesia. She asked for her baby. I told her it would be better this way. She never knew the truth, and maybe she shouldn't. But he'll have every chance she couldn't give him. When Micah stared at the page for a long, hollow moment. When he spoke, his voice was unsteady. She knew. Patrice nodded, eyes wet. She wasn't alone in it. Calvin did this with her. Micah folded the letter slowly, the tremor in his hands the only betrayal of his composure. Then it's time to find out why. The park emptied slowly as the sky darkened. Couples drifted away, joggers disappeared into the trees, and cicadas began their nightly chorus. Only the two of them remained at the corner table. Patrice, with her trembling hands folded around a cooling cup of tea, and Micah with his jaw set. the letter lying between them like evidence in a trial. "I can't believe she wrote this," Micah said at last, his voice low, his eyes still fixed on the page. "She always told me adoption was the most selfless act anyone could make." She made it sound noble, merciful. Patrice's heart tightened. "That's how a lie survives, Micah. It's dressed in mercy." He leaned back, running a hand over his face. The calm billionaire exterior was fracturing, and underneath it, she could see the boy. Hurt, searching, raw. "I keep thinking about every moment that never should have belonged to me. Every Christmas. Every birthday. Every time she said she was proud." He swallowed. "What kind of woman steals another's child and calls it love?" Patrice looked away, her voice trembling with both anger and compassion. "A desperate one. A woman who couldn't bear the emptiness of her own arms." Silence stretched between them, fragile and alive. Micah turned the letter over as though hoping for more. "If this is true, then my mother and your ex-husband both committed crimes. Fraud, falsifying birth and death records, unlawful adoption. But 30 years later," he exhaled sharply, "we might be too late for justice." "Justice isn't always about punishment," Patrice said. "Sometimes it's about truth finding daylight." He nodded slowly. "Then daylight it is." They agreed to start with facts, not fury. Micah would use his resources, quietly. His private investigator, Nate Holloway, had connections in both the legal and medical archives. Patrice, meanwhile, would search her own history. Hospital discharge papers, signatures, and any trace of the nurse who'd whispered, "I'm sorry all those years ago, Dr. Teresa Green," Patrice said. "She was in the room when I delivered. She held my hand when I woke up. I remember her saying, 'He's gone, sweetheart. You rest now.' And when I asked to see him," her voice faltered. "She just cried." Micah listened, still and intent. "Then she's the key. If anyone remembers the truth, it'll be her." Patrice nodded. "I looked her up last year. She's alive, but retired. There were rumors she developed early dementia. She's at an assisted living center just outside Savannah." "Then we'll visit her," Micah said firmly. "Tomorrow," Patrice hesitated. "Micah, I don't want this to destroy what's left of your life. You've built something good. You have a name, a legacy." He cut her off gently. "If that legacy was built on stolen ground, it deserves to crumble." There was no anger in his voice, only certainty. It made her proud and terrified at once. Back home, Patrice spread the old documents across her kitchen table. The light was dim, a single lamp glowing against the dark. Hospital wristbands, appointment slips, Calvin's signature at the bottom of a release form. The man had hidden betrayal in legal ink. She whispered to the room, "You stole my child, Calvin. But you didn't steal my truth." She looked at her reflection in the window, the faint crescent on her wrist catching the light, and smiled sadly. And now he's coming back. At midnight, her phone buzzed. Micah's name lit the screen. "I found something," he said when she answered. "What is it?" "The archives. There's a sealed folder under your name and the date of my birth. The hospital's file system labels it as deceased infant, authorization required." Patrice's heart stopped. "You're sure?" "Yes, but there's more. The signature on the authorization, it's not yours." "Then whose is it?" Micah hesitated. "Calvin Pierce." The air left her lungs. For years, she'd thought she'd gone mad remembering that night differently, that something had been off. But she'd buried it beneath grief. Now, proof. "I'll drive to Savannah at dawn," Micah said. "If Dr. Green is lucid, she can confirm everything." "Are you ready?" Patrice looked at the photo on her dresser, the one she'd stared at every birthday, every Christmas, every time she'd whispered a prayer to a baby she thought was gone. "Yes," she said. "I've been ready for 30 years. The call ended, but neither of them slept. Somewhere between night and morning, Atlanta's skyline turned to silver. The truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was waiting to be claimed. The morning air carried a nervous calm. The city still slept while Patrice packed a small overnight bag. No makeup, no perfume, just truth and the steady weight of memories. The sunrise bled across Atlanta's skyline as she drove to meet Micah. He was already waiting in front of the Langston Hotel, leaning against a sleek black car that looked too quiet for its power. Gone was the pressed suit. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a gray jacket, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked younger, less composed, like a man stripped down to his humanity. "You sure you want to come?" he asked when she pulled up. "I've been sure since the night I saw your wrist," she said, fastening her seatbelt. Micah nodded and merged onto the highway. The hum of the tires filled the silence between them. Neither needed to speak much. The air carried enough history for 2 lifetimes. "Do you remember anything about the doctor?" Micah asked quietly. Patrice's eyes stayed on the passing fields. "Dr. Yvette Morgan was there when I went into labor. Calvin brought her. Said she was a friend. She talked about risks, about premature birth. I trusted her. I didn't know she was making plans with him behind my back." Micah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "My mother told me she'd never had children of her own, that she couldn't. She said I was the answer to a prayer." He gave a hollow laugh. "She didn't tell me whose prayer she stole to make it come true." Patrice's voice softened. "She loved you, Micah. I saw it in her letter. Twisted or not, she loved you." He exhaled slowly, gaze steady on the road. "Love doesn't erase what she did, but maybe it explains it." They drove in silence the rest of the way, the Georgia highways unspooling like a film reel of everything unsaid. Before visiting Dr. Green, they stopped at a private diagnostics lab Micah trusted, the kind of discreet facility that handled the secrets of politicians and CEOs. Patrice hesitated at the door. "What if it's wrong? What if I've built all this up in my head?" Micah turned toward her, his expression softening. "Then we'll still have answers. Either way, we walk out of here with the truth." Inside, the technician greeted them with professional warmth, took their samples, a cheek swab for both, and promised expedited results. "Results within 24 hours, the woman said, labeling the vials. "We'll notify you directly." Patrice nodded, her stomach churning with equal parts dread and hope. "Thank you." When they left, Micah held the door open for her like instinct. She caught his reflection in the glass. Tall, strong, and carrying the same calm energy she'd once imagined her baby might have grown into. For a moment, her throat closed. "What?" he asked when he saw her pause. "You move like your father," she murmured, half to herself. "But your eyes? Those are mine." He didn't answer, but his jaw worked once, emotion restrained but present. By early afternoon, the sun turned gold against the marshland. The assisted living facility sat at the edge of a quiet road lined with magnolia trees, their blooms already beginning to brown in the heat. The nurse at the front desk recognized Dr. Teresa Green's name immediately. "She's one of our favorites," the woman said kindly. "Good days and bad days, but she remembers faces from the past better than breakfast. 3rd floor, room 312. Patrice and Micah exchanged a glance, a shared pulse of nerves, and took the elevator up. The hallway smelled faintly of lilac and antiseptic. Old gospel music floated from one of the rooms. When they reached 312, Patrice knocked lightly. A frail voice answered, "Come in." Dr. Teresa Green sat by the window in a wheelchair, wrapped in a cream shawl. Her hair, once chestnut, had faded to silver, and her skin carried the map of a long, honest life. But her eyes, sharp, intelligent, sparked with recognition the moment she looked at Patrice. "Patrice Holt," she whispered. "Lord, I never thought I'd see you again." Patrice froze. "You remember me?" "How could I forget?" Teresa said softly. "You were my patient. You fought that anesthesia like a lioness." Patrice stepped closer, trembling. "Dr. Green, my baby. They told me he didn't make it." The older woman's hands shook. "Sit down, child. Both of you." Micah moved behind his mother, placing a hand on her shoulder as if anchoring her. Teresa looked up at him, and her breath caught. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's him. I'd know that mark anywhere." Patrice's eyes filled. "Then it's true." Teresa nodded slowly, tears forming. "Calvin came to me before the birth. Said there was a woman, a friend, who couldn't conceive. He wanted to arrange an adoption before delivery. I refused at first. But Dr. Morgan, she insisted. She said the baby's chances were slim, that she could ensure he'd live if we let her take him immediately. She lied, Patrice said, her voice breaking. She did, Teresa whispered. But she was persuasive. Your husband signed the paperwork himself. The birth certificate, the death certificate, both forged. They told you the baby was gone while they handed him to her waiting car. Patrice covered her mouth to stifle the sound that escaped her. Micah stepped closer, one hand reaching unconsciously toward her back. I've carried that sin for 30 years, Teresa said, tears running freely now. I wanted to tell you, but Calvin threatened to ruin me. I tried once, sent you a letter, but it was intercepted. I thought you'd moved away. When I heard Dr. Morgan adopted a child the next week, I knew. I knew it was him. Patrice reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. You did what you could. You survived. That's enough. Teresa's tired eyes lifted to Micah's face. You turned out strong. That makes the rest of us sinners sleep a little easier. Micah knelt beside her, his voice rough. Thank you for telling us. It means everything, she smiled faintly. No, son. It means everything to her. When they left the facility, the sun was setting behind the marsh. The sky streaked pink and amber. Patrice leaned against the car, finally letting the tears come. Micah stood beside her, silent but present. It's true, she whispered. You're mine. He didn't speak at first. Just looked at her, eyes glassy with emotion he didn't know how to carry. Then quietly, he said the words she had waited her whole life to hear. Mom. Patrice broke completely. She folded into his chest, and he held her as if he'd always known how. The next day, the DNA results arrived. Kin 9% match, biological mother and son. Science had spoken. The truth, at last, was undeniable. The world felt different after the DNA results. Clearer, quieter, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Patrice and Micah sat in a small cafe in downtown Savannah, the report lying open between their coffee cups. The words 99.9% biological match glowed like both proof and prophecy. Patrice traced the edge of the paper with her thumb. For years I thought grief made me crazy, she murmured. Now I see it was memory keeping me sane. Micah didn't answer at first. He was still processing, still trying to fit 30 years of truth into a space where lies had lived comfortably his whole life. He finally said, I feel everything. Anger, relief, guilt for being grateful to the woman who stole me. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. I don't even know which emotion deserves to come first. Whichever one you can stand to feel, Patrice said softly. The rest will wait their turn. He looked up at her then, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no barrier between them. No politeness, no fear. Just blood recognizing itself. Before leaving Savannah, Micah insisted they see Dr. Green one last time, to make sure she understood that her confession hadn't been for nothing. When they arrived at her room, she was awake, the television humming softly in the background. She smiled faintly when she saw them. You came back, she said, her voice thin but steady. We wanted to thank you, Patrice replied, taking her hand. Your truth gave us ours. Teresa nodded slowly. I prayed for that. Every night. I just wanted you to know your boy lived a good life. Micah stepped forward. He did, because of you. Teresa's eyes filled again. Don't make me a saint, son. I was complicit. Fear makes cowards of good people. Dr. Morgan was persuasive, powerful. But I still could have said no. Patrice squeezed her hand. You did what you had to survive. She didn't just steal a baby, Teresa whispered, voice trembling. She stole your motherhood. Your right to hold him, to name him. She told me Calvin agreed. Said it was better this way, that you weren't stable enough to raise him after the trauma. He signed every form with a steady hand. Patrice closed her eyes. He always did. She told me the hospital would bury a stillborn, Teresa continued. But later that night, I saw a nurse wheel a bassinet out the back door. I'll never forget it. Dr. Morgan was waiting by her car. Expensive, black, government plates. She drove off with him. The next morning, the paperwork appeared on my desk. Already notarized by Calvin, Patrice said bitterly. Yes. And 2 weeks later, he resigned from the hospital's legal department and started his own firm. Teresa's voice faltered. He got rich off other people's silence. Micah and Patrice exchanged a look, the same thought flashing through both of them. Pierce and Harrington. The firm now represented Mercer Technologies. The chain had never really broken. It had just gone invisible. Micah took out his phone, placed it gently on the bedside table. "Dr. Green," he said, "would you be willing to record your statement? Just in case something happens to you and or to us." The old woman hesitated, then nodded. "You're going to need proof. Men like Calvin rewrite history for a living." He pressed record, and Teresa began, slowly, painfully, recounting everything. Names, dates, how the signatures were falsified, how the paperwork disappeared, how she had kept one photocopy of the birth log hidden for years in a Bible's hollowed spine. "I couldn't destroy it," she whispered. "It was the only piece of truth I still had." She gave them the folded page, its edges brittle but the ink still visible. Baby boy Holt, born alive, breathing, 6 pounds 2 ounces. Signed, Dr. Teresa Green. Patrice clutched it to her chest. For the first time in 30 years, she was holding her son's birth record, the proof that her grief had never been madness. Teresa passed away 3 weeks later. Her heart simply stopped in her sleep. Micah paid for the funeral, small, dignified, with gospel hymns drifting through the chapel. Patrice placed white lilies on the casket, whispering, "You set us free." Afterward, they stood together outside, the sun gentle on their faces. "What now?" Patrice asked quietly. Micah's gaze was steady. "Now we go home, and we face him." "You mean Calvin?" "And the firm," Micah said. "He buried truth under contracts and confidentiality agreements. We'll unearth everyone." Patrice looked up at him, her son, tall and determined, every bit the man she'd imagined in her dreams. "You don't have to do this for me." "I'm not," he said. "I'm doing it for both of us." By the time they drove back to Atlanta, the clouds had thickened into storm gray. Micah's car sliced through the rain, and Patrice could almost feel the city waiting, as if justice had been circling too long and was finally ready to land. They had everything they needed now: a confession, a letter, a birth log, and the DNA report. But Calvin Pierce had power. And men with power didn't surrender truth. They bargained with it. Atlanta's skyline shimmered under a low, gray morning, the glass towers catching faint streaks of sun like blades. Patrice stood outside Pierce & Harrington LLP, the law firm her ex-husband had built out of deception, greed, and other people's losses. The building loomed above Peachtree Street, all sharp corners and expensive silence. Beside her, Micah adjusted his cufflinks. Calm, lethal calm, the kind that came from power trained to wait. "You don't have to come in," he murmured. "I do," Patrice said, her voice steady. "He took my voice once." "I won't let him keep it," Micah nodded once. "Then let's end this." The receptionist, a young woman with bright lipstick and nervous hands, looked up. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer. Mr. Pierce is expecting you?" "Of course he is," Micah said, walking past her without breaking stride. They entered the corner conference room. Calvin Pierce was already there, standing by the window like a man rehearsing his own importance. His reflection caught the city behind him, but he didn't turn until the door closed. "Micah," he greeted smoothly, extending a hand. "Always a pleasure." Micah didn't take it. "Let's not pretend this is social, Mr. Pierce." Calvin's eyes flicked toward Patrice, and for a moment his expression faltered. "Patrice," he said almost gently. "You look older," she interrupted. "So do you, but only one of us aged with a conscience." The jab landed. He blinked, then chuckled softly. "I see we're skipping pleasantries." Straight to business, Micah said. He placed a black folder on the table and opened it with quiet precision. Inside this are sworn statements, medical logs, and a recorded confession from Dr. Teresa Green before she passed away. Calvin's smile thinned. I see. And what exactly do you think this proves? That you falsified my birth records, Micah said. That you colluded with Dr. Yvette Morgan to steal a newborn child and cover it with a fake death certificate. That you lied to your wife and to the state for profit. Calvin didn't move, but his pupils narrowed, his voice flattening. Be very careful with your accusations. Patrice stepped forward, pulling another sheet from her purse. DNA confirmation, 99.9%. He's my son. The one you told me was dead. Calvin's breath caught for just a second, barely visible, but enough. You can't prove intent, he said, recovering quickly. Even if this fantasy had a shred of truth, the statute of limitations doesn't apply to fraud, Micah interrupted. And we both know obstruction of medical records is federal. He leaned in, his calm slicing through Calvin's defense like glass. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a written confession detailing the events of that night. Your role, Dr. Morgan's, and the falsified documents. You'll also transfer 30% of your firm's assets into a trust, the Holt Mercer Foundation for Family Justice. Calvin's face darkened. You think you can threaten me? Micah smiled faintly. No, Mr. Pierce, I'm not threatening you. I'm saving you. From indictment, from scandal, from the clients who will run the second they learn what kind of man you are. Patrice laid the folded birth record on the table like a gravestone. You buried my child on paper, she said softly. Now you'll bury your lies in ink. Calvin paced to the window, fingers trembling slightly as he lit a cigarette, an old habit she hadn't seen in decades. You always underestimated me, Patrice, he said, voice low. You never understood the world we live in. There are rules. And you broke every one that mattered, she shot back. He turned to Micah. You don't know the cost of truth, son. You think you're ready to destroy everything your mother built? Micah's voice didn't waver. She's the one who destroyed it when she stole what wasn't hers. This isn't vengeance. It's correction. Calvin exhaled smoke, sharp and bitter. And if I refuse? Micah reached into the folder and slid a small flash drive across the table. Then this recording, Dr. Green's written affidavit, and the DNA results go to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the medical board, and your firm's investors. By this time tomorrow, your name will be trending with the word criminal. Patrice crossed her arms, watching him closely. You have 48 hours, Calvin. After that, the world hears what you did to both of us. For the first time since she'd met him, Calvin Pierce looked small, his confidence deflating under the weight of his own past. He didn't speak again, only stared out at the city that no longer bowed to him. When they walked out of the building, the rain had started again, soft, cleansing, relentless. Patrice exhaled deeply, feeling years slide off her chest. I never thought I'd see the day he looked powerless. Micah handed her an umbrella, his voice gentle. That's because you took your power back, she smiled faintly. We did. They walked side by side down Peachtree Street, the city's neon lights reflecting on wet pavement. Somewhere behind them, Calvin Pierce sat in his office, staring at a clock that was finally ticking against him, and for the first time, Patrice didn't look back. Micah's lawyer called early. He signed, she said simply. Everything. Confession, transfer papers, full cooperation. It's done! Patrice covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. It's over. Micah's voice came through the phone, quiet but sure. No, Mom. It's just beginning. 2 weeks later, Atlanta moved under a gentler sky. The city's rhythm had softened, as though the universe itself had exhaled with them. Calvin Pierce's confession had circulated quietly through legal channels, just as Micah intended. Controlled leaks, sealed statements, no grand headlines, only the right people seeing the truth. The Holt Mercer Foundation for Family Justice was officially established that Monday. Patrice stood beside her son at the signing, her hands trembling slightly as the notary stamped the final document. For families torn apart by lies, she read softly from the inscription on the folder. Micah looked at her with quiet pride. "You're the reason it exists," he said. She smiled faintly. "No, we are." Calvin Pierce resigned from his firm the following morning. His statement cited personal health matters and a desire to step away from active litigation. The legal community knew better, but Atlanta had a way of whispering mercy when it suited its favorites. He sold his penthouse, retreated from public life, and for once stopped controlling the story. In the privacy of her heart, Patrice forgave him, not for his sake, but for her own. For years, Patrice had avoided pianos. The last time she'd played was the week before her son was taken. The melody of Claire de Lune had filled the hospital hallway, her fingers light, her belly round with hope. Now, at Micah's urging, she began again. He had surprised her one morning, arriving at her small apartment with movers and a grand ebony piano. "It was restored from an estate sale," he said, grinning. "You said you used to play a Steinway. I found one that needed a second chance, too." She pressed a single key. The note trembled like something rediscovered. "You didn't have to do this." "I did," he said softly, "because I missed 30 years of lullabies." When the Holt Mercer Foundation launched, they held the inaugural gala at the Atlanta Symphony Hall, a night of music, storytelling, and truth. Patrice hadn't planned to perform, but Micah convinced her gently. "You started with music," he'd told her. "Let's start our new life the same way." Now she sat under the golden lights, a deep blue gown shimmering like midnight water, her hands poised above ivory keys. The hall fell silent. She began with a soft melody, slow, searching. It wasn't Chopin or Debussy this time. It was her own composition, written during sleepless nights when grief had been her only company. But tonight the notes no longer mourned. They remembered. As she played, she glanced up. In the front row, Micah sat beside Dr. Yvette Morgan's empty chair. He'd chosen to invite no one from her family, no publicity. He just held a single silver bracelet in his hand, his old baby bracelet, now engraved with the crescent moon. When the final chord dissolved into applause, he stood, walked onto the stage, and embraced her. The hall rose to its feet, clapping not just for the music, but for something larger, the resurrection of a bond that had been buried and still refused to die. At the back of the hall, partially hidden in the dim light, Calvin watched from a corner seat. He looked smaller now, thinner, aged. When Patrice's eyes briefly found him, he didn't look away. He nodded once, slowly, as if admitting that truth had finally done what his lies never could. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to the piano and played a quiet encore. A song without words, just peace. Later that night, they walked together along Peachtree, the applause still echoing faintly in their ears. "I don't think I've ever heard a room so quiet," Micah said. Patrice smiled, the night breeze catching her curls. That's what truth sounds like. It makes noise and silence all at once. He took her hand, not as a billionaire, not as a savior, but as a son. "Do you think it's really over now?" She looked up at the moon, half full and glowing. "The hurt never ends," she said. "It just learns to live beside the healing." He squeezed her hand. "Then let's live." And for the first time, she truly believed they could. Morning sunlight poured through the windows of Micah's home office, a glass-walled space overlooking the city that had once symbolized power, and now, finally, peace. The skyline of Atlanta glittered like a promise kept. On the desk, beside his laptop, lay 2 framed photos, one of him as a boy with Yvette Morgan, smiling in a park long before he knew the truth, the other of him and Patrice at the foundation gala, her hand on his shoulder, both of them radiant in forgiveness. The contrast was striking, one stolen beginning, one reclaimed destiny. Patrice entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Still working?" "Habit," Micah said, smiling. "Old routines die hard." She handed him a cup and took the chair opposite. "You remind me of your father when you do that," she said softly. He looked up, curious. Calvin? She nodded. He had that same look, like the world was a chessboard and he was planning 5 moves ahead. Her gaze softened. Except you play to protect people. He played to own them. Micah took a slow sip of coffee. You still think about him? Sometimes, she admitted. But not with hate anymore. That man's shadow lived over my life for decades. I think I've finally stepped out of it. Micah smiled faintly. Then you're free. She reached across the table, placing her hand on his. We're free. By spring, the Holt Mercer Foundation was fully operational. They worked quietly but powerfully, funding legal teams to reunite separated families, sponsoring DNA re-identification programs for adoption fraud victims, and offering scholarships for children born from systemic neglect. Each week, Patrice visited the downtown office, a renovated brick space filled with art from local Black painters and sunlight spilling through tall windows. Her official title read Director of Outreach, but Micah often teased that she was really the heart of the place. People don't donate because of my tech empire, he said during one interview. They donate because my mother knows how to make strangers feel like home. When Patrice heard that later, she cried quietly, happy tears this time. In August, Micah invited her to the annual board retreat on Martha's Vineyard, the same island where Dr. Yvette Morgan had once hosted extravagant fundraisers. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The house was vast but warm, wooden floors, salt air drifting through open windows, and a grand piano in the parlor. On the last evening, after the board dinner ended, Micah found her there, running her fingers idly along the keys. He smiled. I think this piano's been waiting for you. She looked up. You really believe in full circle moments, don't you? I believe in fixing the endings people tried to steal. She played a soft tune, a lullaby she hadn't touched since before he was born. The melody carried through the house, gentle and endless. When she finished, Micah stood by the window staring out at the silver water. I never asked you, he said quietly. What did you name me? Before they took me, Patrice froze. Then, after a long breath, she said, Malachi. It means my messenger, I thought. Maybe you'd carry something into this world I never could. Micah turned, eyes glistening. Then I guess the name still fits. She laughed softly through her tears. Maybe it does. A month later, during a televised charity gala, Micah was asked a question by a reporter. Who inspires you the most, Mr. Mercer? He paused, glanced toward the front row where Patrice sat in a dark green gown, elegant and calm. The cameras followed his gaze. My mother, he said simply, the one who gave me life, and the one who fought to get it back. The audience fell into a hush, followed by applause. Patrice covered her mouth with one hand, her eyes shimmering. That moment, after 30 years of silence, was her redemption. Not from the world, but from herself. Later that night, after the crowd had gone, they walked along the balcony, city lights reflecting in the glass towers below. The same crescent moon that had marked both their wrists hung high above them, quiet witness to their reunion. Do you ever think about what life might have been like if we hadn't found each other? Micah asked. Patrice smiled, her voice calm. No, because that life doesn't matter anymore. This is the one that does. They stood in silence, the wind curling softly around them. Tell me the story of my birth again, he said finally. She laughed gently. You already know it. I know the facts, he said. Not the way you remember it. So she told him about the storm outside that night, the jazz on the radio, the way the nurse held her hand and said, You're stronger than you think. She spoke of love and pain intertwined, of loss that tried to stay permanent and failed. And when she finished, Micah whispered, I was meant to find you. Patrice looked up at the moon, the same crescent that had bound them since the beginning, and said, You always were. The following year, the Holt Mercer Foundation opened a new wing in its Midtown headquarters, a community music studio for at-risk youth, named the Teresa Green Center for Healing. At the entrance hung a plaque that read, Truth doesn't erase pain, it teaches it to sing. Every night, when the building emptied and the city grew still, Patrice sometimes returned alone. She'd sit at the piano, play softly, and think of everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained back. The keys no longer sounded like grief. They sounded like forgiveness, and under the quiet hum of the Atlanta night, the moon kept watch over them both, two souls who had finally rewritten their story.